So in this video we'll be looking at conversion graphs and focusing on how to draw and use a conversion graph. Now conversion graphs are an easy way of converting one unit to another. Now it's a convenient way as you don't need to multiply or divide by the conversion rate. So for example here you can see on your screens that we've got a conversion graph that converts miles into kilometers and kilometers into miles. Now how we use a conversion graph is you will have two units that are being converted. So here we've got kilometers going along our y-axis or the vertical axis, and here we've got miles on our x-axis or on our horizontal values. Now if you're wanting to convert kilometers to miles, so if I just write kilometers to miles, then what you do is you find the kilometer value along our y-axis or along our vertical axis. You then, so for example, if you wanted to convert, let's say 70 kilometers into miles, then what I would do is I would find 70 kilometers along the vertical axis, and what I'll do is I draw a horizontal line until it hits my conversion line. And once it hits the line, I then need to accurately project downwards, and again I would use a ruler to find out how many miles that roughly would be. Now again, depending on the accuracy of your axes and the graph paper that you're using, you pretty much have to approximate what value that's going to be. Now looking at the top line going downwards, if that line was straight, and again I recommend you use a ruler, which clearly I have not, so I would say roughly it's approximately, which is why I'm going to use the little curly equal signs, I would say it's roughly about 48 miles. Now if I was going to convert, let's say 30 miles into kilometers, then what I would do is I'd find 30 miles along my horizontal axis, so here's 30, and I would draw a line going vertical up to that point till it hits the line, and as soon as it hits the line I would then draw a horizontal line and find what value along the kilometers axis does it equal, and that would roughly, I would say is going to be about 46 kilometers, or maybe 48 actually, call it 48. So as you can see, all it's about doing is approximating, and what you do is you'd read the values from this. So let's have a look at a typical question. So it says here we're going to go through how to use a conversion graph, which is basically what we've done. So here it says use the following conversion graph to convert 30 miles into kilometers, which is basically what we've already done. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to just, first of all, let's color code these questions. I'm going to do this in green. So I'm going to draw a horizontal vertical line. Let's do this properly. Let's do that. And along that line, so let me just edit this like so. And once it hits that line, I then need to draw a straight horizontal line and read off the vertical axes to that point. So I would say at a guess that's going to be about 48 kilometers. Now for the next one, which I'm going to do in orange, so here we're looking at 75 kilometers. So I'm going to find 75, which is here. I'm then going to draw a horizontal line, and as soon as it hits the line I then need to project downwards, and again strongly recommend you use the ruler to do this, and you would read off that value there, which I would say is approximately 47 kilometers. Now there will be some leeway in your exam as to what value you can give, and again let me just make sure I'm writing the right units, which I clearly haven't, so let's just write that, change that to miles. And then now looking at question C, now these questions are very, very common, particularly when it comes to more the latter parts of these questions. So here we've got to convert 400 miles into kilometers. Now the problem with this is that my scale only goes from 0 to 70. That's the only types of values that I can use to work this out. However, the problem with this is I've got to convert 400 miles. So what I've got to do is I've got to pick one of these values along the miles axis that goes into 400. So using one of these numbers, what can I do? Well, I'm going to go for the 40, because I know that 40 times 10 equals 400. So if I can work out how many kilometers there are in 40 kilometers, all I need to do is then multiply that answer by 10, and I'd work out how many kilometers there are in 400 miles. So from the 40, and then let's pick a different colour. So let's go for, let's go for pink. So I'm going to go up to 40. And then as soon as it hits a line, I'm going to go horizontal, and it's this number here. Now I'm going to say that that's roughly round about 63. Let's go for 64. So I'm going to multiply that by 10 because I've already worked out what 40 miles are. I need to know what 400 is. So 64 times 10 is approximately going to give me 640 kilometers. So moving on to the second question of D, 210 kilometers. So I've got to look at the values along the kilometers axis, and I want to see which of these values can I use to try and get 210 kilometers. Well, looking at the factors, well, I know that 10 goes into 210, I know 30 goes into 210, and I know 70 goes into 210. So I can use any of these values that I can work out. Now, in terms of, so picking any of them, it doesn't really matter which one. Now, I personally would go for the highest one out of the three, but again, it's entirely up to you. So let's go for 10. So looking at how many miles there are in 10 kilometers, well, I would say roughly that's about 7. So in 10 kilometers is roughly about 7 miles. So then if I multiply that by 21, and then multiply that by 21, then what I get is 210 kilometers equals, and then it's going to be 7 times 21, which gives me a final answer of 147 miles. And again, what we're doing is we're approximately doing this because we're not accurately working this out because it all depends on our graph. Now, when it comes to question E, so this is asking if it's the conversion rate of miles to kilometers using this graph. Now for this, what I would recommend that you do is use an exact value that you've been given. So here you can see we've got a dot, and this says that 80 kilometers is equal to 50 miles. Now if I just write that down, so we're wanting miles to kilometers, and I know that there are, in 50 miles, that's equal to 80 kilometers. Now I want to know the conversion rate. So what I want to do is I want to try and get this to 1. So think to yourself, what do I have to do, multiplying and dividing, to get from 50 to 1? Well, I need to divide by 50. So if I divide that by 50, I need to divide the kilometers by 50 as well. So if I do 80 divided by 50, I get 1.6 kilometers. And that there is my conversion rate. So the answer to this particular question is going to be that 1 mile is equal to 1.6 kilometers. Now, if the question was reversed, let's say it was kilometers to miles, then what I would do is I'd use one distinct point. So I know that 80 kilometers is equal to 50 miles. So what I would do, so if I want to get 1 kilometer, think to yourself, what do I have to do to get from 80 to 1 by multiplying and dividing? So I'm going to have to divide by 80. So if I do 50 divided by 80, and I do that on my calculator, I get an answer of 0.625 miles. So that would be the conversion rate of kilometers to miles. So it's always important that you do read the question carefully. So now let's have a look at drawing a conversion graph. Now the important thing to remember is that in order for you to draw a conversion graph, which is usually and often a straight line graph, that you need at least 2 accurate values that we can use as coordinates. Now sometimes you'll be given a table of values, and other times you may be given an equation, and if you are given an equation, then like I said, I will go through an example where we are done that, but I would say that it's important that you're able to plot a graph based on the equation, which is in another video. Now in this particular example, it says that the table shows a temperature written in both degrees Celsius and degrees Fahrenheit, and you can see we've got 3 potential coordinates that we've got. So let me just highlight what those 3 coordinates are, which is like so. Now the first part says use this information to draw a graph to convert degrees Celsius and degrees Fahrenheit. So what we're going to do here is we're going to plot these 3 points. So the first one is at -10, 14. So looking at my boxes, the first thing to establish is that the horizontal axis, which is degrees, is going up. So one box, it represents 1 degree. However, for the Fahrenheit one, that one box represents 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's important that here for -10, which is here, which is our first block, but for 14, I need to go 7 boxes up. So the first point is going to be there. Then for the second one, I've got 10, 50. So I'm going to go across to 10 and then go up to 50, which is going to be there. And then the final one, which is 30, 60, 86, so 30, 86, which is going to be about here. Now, what you should be able to find is that if you've plotted these correctly, that it should be a straight line, which, looking at the points I've plotted, is just that. So what I'm now going to do is use a ruler to plot a line through those 3 coordinates. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to extend the line so it goes to the edge of my graph. And so let me just extend that one line there. And this is always good practice. You always extend the line. Don't just go through the points that you've marked. It'll make it a little bit more awkward. So there I've done my part A. So I've plotted my points. Now the question is asking me to use the graph to convert 20 degrees Celsius into Fahrenheit. So what I'm going to do is I've looked at 20 degrees. So here I'm looking at this point here. So I'm going to draw a vertical line going upwards from 20 degrees Celsius and until it hits the point. And what I'm then going to do is, as soon as it hits the line, I'm then going to project across, giving me my values. Now, when you've got actual graph paper, it's definitely a lot more accurate, as you can see, than looking at typical just normal squared paper. So looking at this, I've got to remember that every little box represents 2, so that's going to be 62, 64, 66. So I'd say that my answer is approximately 66 degrees Fahrenheit, and there is my final answer. And the important thing to remember is don't forget the units to write in your answer. So let's have a look at an exam style question. So in this question it says that Elle and Tamsin go together to get their holiday money. Elle changes £100 into euros and gets 140 euros, and Tamsin changes £210 into euros and receives 294 euros. Now the first part says plot this information on a graph and join the points with a straight line to make a conversion graph. Now, in terms of this main bulk of our question, which is this here, now to draw a conversion graph, I need 2 coordinates. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use L's values to give me 1 coordinate. So here I've got 100 and 140. And I'm going to use Tamsin's as my second coordinate, which is 210 and 294. Now the question is, how do I go about drawing my graph? Now to do this, what I would recommend is, now because we're starting with pounds, I would do whatever your value you're starting with goes along the x-axis, or the horizontal axis in this case. And whatever it's equaling to, I would have that going along the vertical axis or your y-axis. So I'm going to have euros going up there. Now in order to draw up my scale, what I need to do is make sure that I'm able to plot these 2 coordinates. So here, now for pounds, I'm going to go from 0 to, let's say, 300. And for euros, I'm going to go from 0 to 500. Again, let me just get rid of that so it doesn't look like a coordinate. So for the euros, I'm going to go 0 to 500 upwards. And then I'm going to plot these 2 coordinates and join them up with a straight line as instructed in part A. So here is my graph, and I've just made sure that I've labelled the axes, so euros and pounds, going along the horizontal and vertical axes respectively, and I've made use of my graph, making it as big as possible. Now one thing you should be able to notice is that each little small box goes up in tens, and that's going to be really important that I'm able to read our values accurately, because obviously any values I'm going to go for are going to be denominator sort of multiples of 10. So looking at question B, I'm going to use the graph to convert 250 pounds. So I'm going to find 250 along the horizontal axis, which is about there, and I'm then going to draw a vertical line until it hits that line. Now again, it's always important that you do use a ruler for this, and then once it hits the line, I'm then going to project across and then read out what that value is. Now as each little box equals 10, that means that this value here is going to be equal to 350 euros, and there's my final answer for that one. For the next part, which is converting 250 euros, again I'm going to find 250 along my vertical axis, which is there, and I'm going to draw a straight horizontal line, and as soon as it hits the line, I'm then going to plot it downwards to find out what the value is going to be in pounds. And looking at that value there, it's going to give me £180. And there is my final answer. Now for part C, it says use the graph to convert £600 into euros. Explain how you worked out your answer. Now the problem about working with this is I don't have £600. I can only go up to 300. So what I need to do is use either 100, 200 or 300 to get 600. Now it doesn't really matter which value you pick, but I'm going to go for 100, and the reason why I'm going to go for 100 is because I know the exact value. I know that £100 is 140 euros. So if I start off with £100, and I know that that is equal to 140 euros, or to get to £600, now again, when you're doing this, you can only multiply, divide. So we need to multiply by 6. So if I multiply this answer by 6, so I've got 140 times 6 gives me an answer of 840 euros. So answer this question then, so the answer would be 840 euros. And how do I get that answer? Well, if £100 is equal to 140 euros, then £600 is going to be equal to 140 times 6, which is 840 euros. And there is my final answer. So let's have a look at our second exam style question. So in this question it says that the formula m equals 2.5p represents the money in pounds earned from an exam marker by the number of papers they mark. So let's just highlight this formula because I'm going to guess I'm going to be needing that. Let's try that again. There we go. And so part A then says using the axes plot this equation and produce a conversion graph of papers marked to the money earned. Now if the graph, now typically in an exam, because they don't want you wasting time trying to draw a set of axes and pick a scale, they would usually give this scale to you. But let's just explain if that wasn't the case. Now we're controlling papers, and the number of papers turns into money. So papers is going to go along our x-axis, and the money earned is going to go along our y-axis. Now we need to plot this equation here. Now in order for us to plot an equation, we need two coordinates. So what I need to do is to create a table of values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have P, which is what I control, and that equals money. Now, because it's going to produce a straight line graph, what we're going to assume to be a straight line graph, is I need to pick two coordinates. Now what I'm going to do is start easy. So I'm going to start with 0. Now again, I'm just going to make these numbers up. So when P equals 0, M is going to equal 2.5 times 0, which is 0. So that there is my first coordinate, which is 0, 0. Now to find the second coordinate, again I can use any number I want, but I want to try and use this graph coordinate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a middle value, which I'm going to go for 10, because that's the axis drawn, and see what the p value is going to be. So when P equals 10, M equals 2.5 times 10, which is 25. Now the good thing is that 25 is a value that I can plot along my vertical axis, so all I now need to do is plot that value. So that's going to be around about there. So now that I've got my two coordinates, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to plot and connect those 2 points with a straight line. So using a ruler, and again try and make sure that your line is extended to the edge of the graph, and again I'm just going to do that again because I missed the point there, which is there. Perfect. So that line goes through 2, and there is my completed conversion graph. Now part B then says use your graph, and again it's important to use the graph. Now it is possible for me to use a formula, but the question specifically says for me to use the graph. So it's how much money is earned from 15 papers. So what I need to do is I need to find the value of 15 along my horizontal axis, which is here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line. Now it is important that you do mark this on your graph because it's telling me to use it. Again using a ruler, which clearly I'm not. And I'm then going to, from that point, as soon as it touches the line, I'm going to project horizontally to find out what this value here is going to be. And I work out that that's approximately £37.50. Now the next question then says how many papers must be marked to earn £45. So I'm going to find 45 along my graph, and I'm going to draw a horizontal line this time until it hits my line. From there I'm just going to project downwards to find out what value it gives me, and I roughly make out that that value is going to be roughly around 18. So it's going to say approximately 18 papers. Now, just like the previous question, in part C, it then says if an exam marker, that should say, let me just change that D to an R. So if an exam marker earned £160, approximately how many papers did they mark? Now, for this particular question, it's going to be very difficult for me to work this out. So what I need to do is, now the money that I've earned only goes up to 50. So what I need to do is find one of these numbers along my vertical axis that goes into 160. So I'm going to go for 40. Well, I know that if you mark 40 papers, well, £40 equals, if I look at 40 and then I project down, I get that 40 papers equals roughly about £16. So 40 pounds equals 16 papers. Now I want to work out what £160, how many papers you need to mark for there. So I need to think to myself, okay, what do I need to multiply 40 to get 160? Well, I need to times that by 4. So if I then multiply 16 by 4, I get an answer of 64 papers. And there is my final answer. Now we'll put some practice questions in the description below for you to practice this particular topic, and I'll also include the answers so you can check to see if you're getting these questions right.